and thanks for tuning in. Brought to you live from Seoul, I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. We begin with the latest on the sunken trawler accident. A total of 11 bodies have been recovered this Wednesday from search and rescue operations for the Korean-operated trawler that sank off Russia's eastern coast this past Monday. After finding 2 bodies earlier in the morning, more ships were sent to the same area where 9 additional victims were later recovered. Of the 11 bodies pulled out of the sea today, Korea's foreign ministry says 3 were Korean, 7 were Indonesian, and 1 was Filipino. Now that pushes the official death toll in the disaster to 12, with 41 others still missing. The cause of the accident is still being investigated. Last night at the National Assembly, next year's government budget was finally given the green light before the legal deadline. Kim Hyun-bin tells us how this was possible and breaks down the government's spending priorities for 2015.
It hasn't happened in 12 years, but on Tuesday, the National Assembly passed next year's government budget bill before the deadline set by the Constitution. The passage is of great significance, as Parliament was able to avoid the tiresome tug-of-war scenarios we've seen in the recent past. This year, the timeline was helped by new pressure. Under the revised National Assembly Act, if lawmakers didn't meet the deadline, the government's draft version of the budget bill would have passed automatically.
Among the 273 lawmakers present, 225 were in favor, 28 against, and 20 abstained. The 2015 budget bill is passed.
Here's what's inside the 2015 budget. The government has allocated $103 billion for welfare, $48 billion for education, $39 billion for R&D and social overhead capital, $34 billion for defense, $15 billion for safety, $4.1 billion for foreign affairs and unification, and the rest for other social costs. A large portion was allocated to welfare and education spending to better help the elderly and to provide free childcare programs for preschoolers. Next year's budget is 5.5%, or $17.6 billion higher than this year's. Apart from the revised budget bill, the 2 parties also passed tax-related bills. They hiked the price of cigarettes by almost $2 a pack in a bid to reducing smoking rates and to make up for tax revenue shortfalls, and a move to boost the domestic economy. Korean companies will be given tax breaks if they increase investments, wages, and dividend payments. Although the budget bill was passed, it's expected the 2 parties will open an extraordinary session after the current parliamentary session ends on December 9th to discuss thousands of pending bills that still await parliamentary approval. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
So what exactly is the new Parliamentary Act and what does it entail? This was the first year the revised legislation was put into practice, but the jury is still out on whether it's in the best interest of the country. Ji Myung-gil has more.
Back in 2012, lawmakers passed the revised National Assembly Act to prevent delays in the passage of budget bills, which were often railroaded at the year's end. The new law made it mandatory for all parliamentary committees to finish their budget reviews by November 30th every year. If they fail to do that, bills are tossed to the parliamentary floor leaders to come to a compromise. The new law was put into action this year, with the 2 main rival parties making strenuous efforts to meet the legal deadline.
We work day and night to review the bills, without ever adjourning a meeting.
At Tuesday's plenary vote, the atmosphere was certainly different. No shouting and no fighting, with lawmakers discussing each bill before it was put to a vote. And although the deadline for passing the budget bill was met for the first time in more than a decade, opposition lawmakers raised issues with the law. They say not enough time was given to thoroughly review both the budget bill and its auxiliary bills. Normally, those bills that are attached to the budget are looked over and approved first by a parliamentary committee. But since there was no agreement in place by the November 30th deadline, the floor leaders took charge and had just 2 days to review them before it was put to a plenary vote. Lawmakers say the parliament usually has the legislative authority to assess the bills that the government proposes. But because of the newly enacted law, the National Assembly merely passed the bills that were drafted by the government to meet the legal deadline. Kim Hyung-gil, ARIRANG News.
North Korea sent a letter to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon saying it will never accept a UN resolution calling for the regime to be referred to The Hague for crimes against humanity. Passage of that resolution is said to be unlikely anyway due to resistance from China and Russia, so South Korea and the US are looking into taking a different tack. Park Ji-won tells us more.
In a letter to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, North Korea's ambassador to the United Nations says Pyongyang cannot and will not accept the adoption of a resolution that takes aim at North Korea's human rights violations. Ambassador Cha Sung-nam writes that the European Union and Japan, who introduced the draft resolution last month, as well as the United States, had chosen a path of confrontation and that North Korea had no choice but to strengthen its war deterrence. That, a North Korean Foreign Ministry statement says, could include another nuclear test. Meanwhile, in a move that aims to keep pressure on Pyongyang and global attention focused on the matter, a group of countries led by South Korea and the US are pushing to put the North Korean human rights issue on the agenda for the UN Security Council before the year is up. 9 of the 15 members of the Security Council would need to vote in favor for the agenda to be set. Permanent members, such as China and Russia, cannot wield their veto power when it comes to agenda setting. There's a sense of urgency for setting the agenda, since half of the 10 non-permanent members currently on the council, including South Korea, will see their 2-year terms end by the end of this month. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
As for the next U.S. Defense Chief, Ashton Carter is reported to be at the top of the list to replace Chuck Hagel. No official announcement has been made from the White House yet, though. Our Shin Se-min has more on what we can expect from his background.
Barring any unexpected setbacks, Ashton Carter looks poised to become the next U.S. Secretary of Defense, replacing Chuck Hagel, who announced plans to step down last week. Carter would be coming into the position with an extensive background in defense matters. He has served as a Deputy Secretary of Defense under Leon Panetta and Chuck Hagel, and as the Undersecretary for Acquisition Technology and Logistics, where he was the Pentagon's chief buyer of weapons and managed its arsenals. Carter is widely known for his experience in managing budgets and weapon contracts. His range of experience is being touted with the multiple crises in the Middle East, namely the threat posed by the Islamic State. On the Asia-Pacific front, Carter has said in the past that military sequestration in the U.S. would not impact the alliance with Korea. During a visit to Seoul early last year, Carter spoke to the U.S. plan to fly nuclear-capable bombers through South Korean airspace for training purposes in the event of war. If and when Carter is nominated, he'll have to go through the confirmation process, likely under the Republican-led Senate early next year. He's expected to pass through thanks to his past experience at the Pentagon and the fact that he has the respect of many senior military leaders. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Meanwhile, the Pentagon nominee to lead U.S. Pacific Command says Washington is ready to fight and defeat the North Korean military. His remarks were made at a confirmation hearing. Here's our Kana Kim with this next report.
The Pentagon's nominee to lead the U.S. Pacific Command has stressed that the security of the Korean Peninsula will remain one of Washington's top priorities under his stewardship. At a Senate confirmation hearing on Tuesday local time, Admiral Harry Harris said North Korea is the most volatile and dangerous threat facing the U.S. as it continues to try and develop its nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them across continents. Although Pyongyang's KN-08 ballistic missile hasn't been flight tested yet, it's believed it could potentially reach the continental United States. The admiral vowed to maintain a forward-deployed U.S. military presence in the West Pacific to deter North Korean aggression. And if all efforts fail, the Pentagon nominee said the U.S. military is ready to fight and defeat the North Korean military. The nominee also noted concerns over China's growing economic and military presence. Harris said China's rapid military modernization and its increasing influence on its neighbors is an enduring challenge. But the admiral did not rule out the possibility of working with China in some aspects so as to reduce the risk of a military misjudgment which could threaten peace. If confirmed by the Senate, Harris will replace Admiral Samuel Locklear. If appointed, Admiral Harris will take a key role in the Obama's administration's pivot to Asia at a time when North Korea and China's rising military power are considered the most dangerous threats to the region. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Bringing you the fresh updates from stories breaking in Korea and abroad. We give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Join Laah Hyun-kyung live from Seoul. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
The co-founders of Occupy Central in Hong Kong are expected to surrender to police today while student protest leader Joshua Wong continues his hunger strike to pressure the Hong Kong government for more talks. Benny Tai, Chang Kim-man, and Chu Yu-ming, who led the pro-democracy movement in the early days, urged student protesters to retreat for the sake of their safety and the original intention of love and peace. Occupy Central said it will continue their fight for democracy in Hong Kong through public debates and community education, as the three leaders encouraged the protesters to also, quote, put down deep roots in the community and extend the spirit of the umbrella movement. Another horrific attack by the Somali-based Islamist militant group Al-Shabaab that murdered dozens of people is putting intense pressure on the Kenyan government. There's video footage that shows the aftermath of the latest Al-Shabaab attack. 36 bodies were discovered in a quarry near the Somali border, at least 2 of them beheaded, most of them shot. Reports say the militants separated and killed the non-Muslims from the Muslims. The group's spokesman said it was a retaliation for the Kenyan government's raid on a mosque last month. In light of the latest incident, Kenya's president says new interior minister has been appointed, and this comes after he accepted resignation of the nation's police chief. Fingers are still pointing toward North Korea as the possible culprit behind last week's cyber attack on Sony Pictures. But there are also those who say it's too soon and too dangerous to jump to any conclusions. Kwon So-ah reports.
More clues point to North Korea being the culprit of the recent cyber attack on Sony Pictures. According to Bloomberg, 2 people they say are credible but not authorized to speak in public said the destructive malware found in Sony's internal system last week contained Korean language code. Other elements found were similar to major attacks on the networks of South Korean banks and TV stations last year, which were blamed on the North.
There are parts of this attack and patterns of this attack that look like things North Korea may have done in the past.
Others are skeptical.
People are initially jumping to the conclusion that because it's coded in Korean, that this might be a North Korea waged attack against Sony in particular or other organizations. We have to be very careful of jumping to those conclusions and automatically assuming attribution in this case.
The FBI, which is investigating the case, has not commented on who they think is behind the cyber attack, but has said that the method of attack had only been seen in Asia and the Middle East up until now. Most eyes are on North Korea, though, as the interview, which centers on a CIA plot to assassinate leader Kim Jong-un, is due to hit screens on Christmas Day. The regime has called the comedy an act of terrorism and vowed merciless retaliation. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
Shares of Korea's top 10 corporations have been sliding of late. Analysts say they are being affected by worsening economic conditions abroad. But could the tide be turning for them in terms of their shares at least? Kim Ji-yeon has more.
The strengthening of the Korean currency and increased competition from China have taken a toll on corporate earnings. Excluding CJ and SK Group, Korea's top 10 corporate groups are feeling the heat. Their share prices have tumbled so far this year. The shipbuilding and petrochemical sectors were among the hardest hit. Shares of Hyundai Heavy Industries have dropped the most by nearly 53%. Shares of Samsung Group have also fallen by nearly 4% this year. It's a similar story for the other 488 listed companies. Their combined net profit fell nearly 13% during the January to September period, from the same period last year to around $45.5 billion.
The company's worsening earnings are being reflected in their stock prices, but Korean shares will likely pick up next year as external conditions improve following economic recoveries in many major global markets.
Daishin Securities predicts Korea's main benchmark Kospi will hit 2,250 at some point from the current 1,900 level. Goldman Sachs also forecasts the Kospi to top the 2,300 level next year, which would be an all-time high. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
In the meantime, Korean conglomerates have been slashing their investments in facilities but boosting spending on R&D as they search for potential areas of future growth. Management evaluation firm CEO Score says Korea's top 30 conglomerates reduced their facilities investment by 10% in the third quarter from a year earlier to nearly $60 billion, but raised their R&D investment by 6% to $24 billion. Samsung Electronics was the country's top investor in both sectors. The company accounted for more than a quarter of all investments among the conglomerates surveyed. The shift from 3G wireless technology to long-term evolution, or LTE, is changing the shape of the global tablet PC market. In a report released on Wednesday, global research firm Strategy Analytics said LTE-capable tablets accounted for 18% of all tablets sold worldwide this year. And that's not all. They are expected to top 20% market share next year. The market share of 3G tablets has slumped to 9% this year, down from 27% when they were launched 4 years ago. Wi-Fi-only tablets account for the vast majority of sales at 73%, but they are forecast to drop below the 70% mark within the next 4 years. Now, we've been talking about falling oil prices recently. It may be welcome news for the drivers, but it's setting off an alarm bell among Korean builders. Slowing demand for petrochemical plants in cash-rich Middle East countries will likely be the future obstacles for them. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
Korean construction companies are not likely to achieve the $70 billion goal set by the government for them to win orders abroad this year. That's largely due to tumbling oil prices, which prompted Middle East oil producers to delay their petrochemical and infrastructure projects. With less than 1 month to go, Korean companies have won less than $60 billion worth of orders so far this year. Government officials say with too many variables in the market, local companies could run into problems in winning major deals for the remainder of the year. The suspension this year of a water management project in Thailand also makes it difficult for the country to meet the goal. The project involves Seoul's state-run Korea Water Resources Corporation. Industry officials say Korean companies will face an even more difficult year in 2015. That's because there's no sign that global oil prices, which have lost 40% from their peak in June, will rebound anytime soon. They say Korean companies are relying too heavily on the Middle East for their overseas construction contracts, although they're trying to diversify their markets. The Korean government is also making efforts to help them find markets elsewhere. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
The life expectancy of Koreans is on the rise and the gap between men and women is narrowing. Statistics Korea says baby girls born in 2013 will live to an average of 85 and boys to 78.5. That's a gap of 6.5 years, the smallest gap ever recorded. The agency attributes the rise to men taking better care of their health. Now, compared to 10 years ago, men's life expectancy has shot up by 4.7 years, while for women it has risen 4.2 years. Well, most of us love a good underdog story, and of course, classic love stories are another favorite. Today, our Im Yun-hee has something on both of those in the form of documentaries. Take a look.
These boys all share the same dream, to become professional football players. But of course, the journey is long, full of sweat and tears, and requires sacrifices. With a new coach heading the junior team, the boys get one step closer to their dreams in this documentary that shows a touching story of teamwork, hard work, and determination to never give up.
There are a lot of adults among us who give up easily, but these children hold tight to their dreams and face all the difficulties with courage, which is something we can all learn from.
결혼하신 지 몇 년 됐어요? 75년인지 6년인지.
76 years of marriage, and now each over 100 years old, this couple illustrates the power of love. Known as the 100-year-old lovebirds, they wear matching traditional Korean clothing every day and even sleep hand in hand, a real-life fairy tale. But all stories have an ending, and now this couple must enter a new stage in their life.
You feel like you're sitting right next to the two of them because the love they have for each other is so contagious. It's perfect for families and will hopefully cause a good reaction.
The documentary brought in thousands of viewers on its very first day, which far exceeded expectations, as society is always ready for a story of true love. Im Yun-hee, ARIRANG News.
It's freezing out here in Korea. Michelle Park here with the latest weather update. Now, there was a heavy amount of snowfall all across the nation, and it's all melted for the most parts by now, but roads and walkways are slippery, so be careful out there. Now, our lows and highs are a bit higher than yesterday, but temperatures will continue to hover right around the freezing point. Now, these regions can expect between 5 to 10 centimeters and up to 15 are expected in the mountainous regions, while surrounding regions such as both Gyeongsang-do provinces and the southern regions will get between 2 and 7 until tomorrow. And to our readings for today, Seoul will peak at 1 degree this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will top to 5 and 8 degrees. And to other regions, Jeju-wan peaks at 10, while Dokdo hits 4, while Mangkeungang tops low at minus 10 degrees. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world. And that's it from us at this hour. I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. We'll be back at 6 p.m. Korea time with more updates. Thank you for watching.